Look at this power steering leak on my Mini Cooper S. I'll talk about this and other problems found during the oil leak inspection. Welcome back to the second video ever on this channel and the slippery slope that is an oil leak inspection. In this video I will go over the leak inspection on the Mini. I'll go over what I was able to see and what I was not able to see during the inspection. I've known about both the power steering leak and the oil leak for a while now. The power steering leak was the bigger of the two because I've noticed oil spots under the car and because I've noticed the power steering reservoir getting low. It's not abnormal to see oil and other fluid seepage, especially as hoses, gaskets, and O-rings get older, while grease seals and oil seals wear out mostly due to mileage. I'll talk a little bit about how I deal with leaks when I first notice them and how I prioritize fixing them. Hopefully this will help you when you notice your car has a leak of some kind. Alright, so we're going to start under the vehicle. We're going to take a look at the power steering pump. As you can see, it's soaking wet with power steering fluid. You'll also notice that it doesn't have the original clamp on it anymore. It has a worm screw style clamp, which I was able to put in a different spot on the hose and tighten up. When I did that, I was able to stop the leak, and it worked for quite a while. So if you're in a spot you can't get it fixed right now, you can try that. Now that trick works really well for a lot of different things. However, there are some items that you just can't do that too. There is a price to pay for patching the leak the way I did. The problem, which is the hose, is still there. Eventually the leak comes back and the fluid gets on everything. In my case, I was fortunate. Power steering pump cooling fan wasn't damaged. I was able to clean it up and it seems to be working okay. In addition, the power steering fluid got on other components and made a mess. The fluid attracts dirt and can damage components around it. Depending on the location of the components on your vehicle, the fluid can get on belts, which is pretty typical since belt-driven pumps are common. Contamination causes the belts to slip and causes them to make noise. And plus, it may mask other leaks. If you try this trick and reposition a clamp on a coolant hose, for example, the hose may rupture with no warning while you're driving, causing the engine to overheat, which can lead to even bigger problems. With a power steering leak, the pump will suck in air when the fluid gets low enough, and at least you get a whining noise. In other words, just because the trick works on several types of clamped hoses doesn't mean it's always a good idea to use it. Typically, oil leaks are slow. They start out as seepage, then drips. Unless you hit something with the engine or transmission oil pans, you won't get a leak that pours out oil. So when I see seepage, I don't take action. I wait until I get drips. In this case, the oil leaks got out of hand. I waited too long to do anything about it, so now I have a lot of cleanup work to do. Other fluids like coolant, brake fluid, and gasoline I fix ASAP. Brake fluid and fuel leaks have a crash and or burn potential. These leaks are the highest priority. Coolant leaks can be hoses that are ready to pop, and if that happens, it doesn't take very long for the engine to overheat and cause major damage.
It's peeing! The car's peeing! The car's peeing coolant!
Now, as far as what I was able to see and not see during the inspection. With the Mini, I had seepage on the valve cover gasket and thought it had developed into a drip. During the inspection, I tried to look in between the engine and radiator, but with the supercharger there, it was too crowded and I couldn't see if the valve cover gasket was the only source of the leak. I took video of that part of the inspection, but since I'm still a noob at this, I lost the footage while learning to move the files around between the camera, computer, and various editing programs I was trying out before I settled on this one. Shout out to Shotcut. It's a steep learning curve, but it's free and it seems to do a lot more stuff than I'm able to do on it. I'm just scratching the surface here. Anyway, it wasn't until I removed the intercooler that I noticed that there was another leak. Once the front bumper was off, I could push back the radiator and I saw a caked up mess of oil and dirt under the supercharger. So I decided to pull off the radiator to get a better look. I researched it a little and it seems that the Mini is known for crank position sensor O-ring leaks. And when I say I did some research on it, it really means I did what everybody else does when they're working on their Minis. I went to Mod Mini and watched a bunch of his videos. If you're here looking for step-by-step information on your Mini, check out his channel. I'll leave a link in the description. So after I saw that whole area covered in oil, I was worried the supercharger may have contributed to that mess. So I decided to check the oil level in it. which means pulling it off the engine to service it. The dipstick gets removed as part of the process, so the O-ring gets replaced too. The more I look at the components that came off and where the oil was caked, I think that the oil is also dripping out of the connection between the supercharger inlet and the plastic throttle body runner. The PCV valve vacuum line, which pulls blow-by gases including oil mist from the crankcase, connects right at that point. Forced air intake systems like this one produce more blow-by gases than a naturally aspirated engine due to the increased pressure in the combustion chamber thanks to all that supercharger goodness. This design seems to collect oil in that spot, which then seems to leak out of that gasket. Finally, during this initial inspection, I saw some grease spatter on my lower control arm. Sure enough, the inner axle boots were torn and grease was flinging out. And as you can see, the front height sensor got covered in grease. This problem can be fixed a couple of ways. One is to replace the axle, which is much easier and a lot less messy. The other is to replace the CV boot. Prices have really dropped on axles on my car over the years, but replacing the CV boot was still a whole lot cheaper. I hadn't noticed any clicking noises during medium to heavy acceleration while turning, like when you find a gap on a busy street you're trying to turn into and you accelerate to merge. That is when you typically hear a bad axle joint. When they're really bad, they'll click even when you're just getting in or out of a parking spot at the grocery store. Basically, what no clicking noise means to me is that I can get away with just replacing the CV boot and not the whole axle. As you can see from all the clips, replacing the CV boot is a messy job, and it may require a puller to slide the needle bearing carrier off the splines. I've replaced CV boots before, but never on a Mini. Normally after the C-clip is removed, the carrier slides right off. It didn't for me. I did try hitting it with a hammer and punch, but the carrier wasn't moving and it was starting to get chewed up. Also, with each strike I was risking that one of those needle bearings would fall apart. I don't know how likely it is for those needle bearings to come apart due to striking the carrier, but I've seen pictures of when they do and I don't want any part of that. So I use the puller instead. It's slower but safer. This is one of those cases where after labor costs are factored in, it may be about the same price to replace the entire axle as it is to replace only the boot if someone else is doing the work for you, or if you need to buy the tool to do the job if you're doing it yourself. It might also be helpful to know that the carrier goes on a certain way. The side that goes against the C-clip is flat and the other side has more of a taper to it. The C-clip may not go back on if the carrier is installed backwards, which means pulling or striking the carrier off again. I hope some of this is helpful. As I mentioned before, I did lose several videos, including the one where I pulled the axles out of the transmission. After I put the axles back in, I may pull them back out and pretend for the camera, so I can do a see the process from start to finish type of video on removing the axles and replacing the CV boots. As I went on performing these repairs, I noticed more stuff that needs to be done, plus some items that just make sense to replace given the mileage of the car and how much work it takes to get to those areas. Currently the car is still in many pieces. I've got lots more work to do on it, which means more content for the channel. I hope to be able to capture more good footage and in time put together videos that are more informative. Thanks for hanging out. Hopefully you found some of this useful or entertaining. Thanks for watching.
I like this camera. I know some of you viewers